NASA has successfully launched its space launch system, and its spacecraft, the Orion, is on its way to the moon as part of the Artemis program. Hi dear students, welcome to Kandela IAS. In this lecture, we shall be discussing about the Artemis program. What does the Space Launch Station mean? What is the spacecraft, the Orion, all about? And what is the significance of Artemis 1? First of all, what is the Artemis program? Artemis is NASA's mission to the moon. Artemis is NASA's mission to the moon, and the word Artemis stands for acceleration, reconnection, turbulence, electrodynamics of moon's interaction with the sun. So what here NASA does is it will build an Artemis base camp on the surface of the moon and a gateway in the lunar orbit. So I'll tell you how this is. So suppose this is the moon. Suppose this is the moon. So NASA will build an Artemis base camp here on the surface of the moon, and the gateway will be placed in the lunar orbit. On the lunar orbit. Okay. So if this is the lunar orbit, the gateway will be placed on the lunar orbit. And the gateway will be available for around a decade, and it will be moving around in the orbit. Okay. So what NASA will do is it will build an Artemis base camp on the surface of the moon, and a gateway will be placed in the lunar orbit. Lunar orbit. So in the orbit, the gateway will keep rotating. So through this space launch station, NASA is aiming to send the spacecraft, which is the Orion, to this gateway. Right? We shall be discussing more in depth about this. Revolving, right? Correct. Begin with. Hi dear students, welcome to Kandela IAS. In this lecture, we shall be discussing about NASA's famous Artemis program. What is Artemis 1, 2, 3? What is the space launch station? What is the gateway? And what is the spacecraft, the Orion, all about? So this is a very ambitious project of NASA and the USA, and we shall be discussing in depth about this in this lecture. What is Artemis program? Artemis program is NASA's mission to the moon, and Artemis stands for acceleration, reconnection, turbulence, electrodynamics of the moon's interaction with the sun. So as part of this program, what does NASA intend to do? NASA, as part of the Artemis program, will build an Artemis base camp on the surface of the moon and a gateway in the lunar orbit. So let me explain to you how this is. Suppose this is the moon. NASA will build a Artemis base camp on the surface of the moon, and in the lunar orbit that is present around the moon, they will place the gateway. So here they will place the gateway, and the gateway will be revolving around the moon. So the gateway will be available for around more than a decade. Okay. So, and the spacecraft will be landing in this gateway, and the astronauts will be able to move from the lunar surface to the gateway and back to Earth. We will be discussing in detail about this further. Okay, so just keep this in mind. So with the Artemis program, NASA aims to build an Artemis base camp on the surface of the moon and a gateway in the lunar orbit. Further, we should also be discussing what is the significance of all of these programs. These elements allow the robots. These elements will allow the robots and the astronauts to explore more and conduct more research about the lunar surface, more than ever done before or earlier. So that is why this is a very popular program of NASA and USA. So why is this Artemis program in news now? On November 16, 2022, that is yesterday, NASA successfully launched the Space Launch System, which carried the spacecraft Orion, and it is on the way towards moon as part of the Artemis program. Okay, so NASA has successfully launched the Space Launch System on 16th of November 2022, and it is the Orion spacecraft is being carried by the most powerful rocket in the world, that is the Space Launch System. In short, we call it as SLS. So what is SLS? SLS is the Space Launch System. It is the rocket which is carrying the spacecraft, and the spacecraft here is Orion. Okay, so just keep these things in mind. What is SLS? SLS is the rocket, and it is carrying a spacecraft called as Orion to the moon. Okay, so yesterday on November 16th, it has already started, and the spacecraft has been launched on November 16th, and the spacecraft is on its way to moon, and it will take few more days to reach the moon's orbit. Okay, so all this is being done as part of the Artemis program of NASA, and that is why it is in news, and it is important for our UPSC preparation as well. Though we may not go too much into the technical aspects, we must at least have some understanding about this such huge science topic, which you can be asked even in science and technology part in your mains, and you can also get prelims questions as well. Okay, so please do not ignore this. Please concentrate. It's a very simple topic and you will be able to understand. So actually speaking, the Artemis first was supposed to be launched much earlier, that is on August 29 itself. But because there were some glitches, that is, there was a problem with one of the engines. Because of that, the spacecraft was grounded back. Okay, it did not take off on August 29. Similarly, again the next launch date was fixed on September 3rd. However, because of a fuel leak, again the spacecraft was grounded. Finally, in this month also, the launch was supposed to happen 2 days prior, but because of the Hurricane Ian, it was delayed, and finally on November 16th, it has been launched successfully. So now, where does this word Artemis come from? What is the meaning of Artemis? According to Greek mythology, Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. The moment we speak about Apollo, I guess you can recall about the Apollo missions of USA and NASA during the 1960s and 1970s, isn't it? It is the Apollo mission which took human beings for the very first time onto the moon. Neil Armstrong was the first person who landed on the moon, right? He was part of the Apollo mission. So here they are giving the name Artemis for this program because it is a twin sister of Apollo. Okay, so here why are they giving this name Artemis? Because Artemis personifies the NASA's efforts to return the astronauts. So first through Apollo missions they took the astronauts to moon. So now this is their second effort to return the astronauts and take them to the moon along with a new wave of science payloads along with technology to the lunar surface. And that is the reason why they have given this name Artemis, because it is a twin sister of Apollo. And Apollo missions happened during 1960s and 1970s, wherein they took the astronauts to the moon, right? The very first person who landed on the moon was, that is Neil Armstrong, was part of the Apollo mission. And now this is the second efforts of NASA to take astronauts to the moon with much more technology and much better science payloads. And that is why they have given the name Artemis. Okay. So when the American astronauts, as part of the Artemis program, land on the moon, they will be landing on a place or on the surface of the moon which has never been landed by anybody else, that is on the moon's south pole. That is why this program is so unique. The astronauts will be landing on the moon's south pole, which has never been done by any other astronauts so far, right? By any other mission, we have not been able to land on the moon's south pole, and this is the very first time this is happening. So, Artemis was formally called as Exploration Mission 1, and this will be the first integrated test of NASA's deep space exploration system. So, the Artemis program is primarily about NASA's intention of exploring deep space. So, as part of this Artemis program, we have three important components. One is the launch system, that is a space launch system, which is the rocket. Okay, this is very, very important. First important aspect of this is the rocket, which is the space launch system. Second one is the spacecraft, that is the Orion. And in addition to that, we also have the ground systems at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. So we know that Florida is located on the east coast of USA, right? So whenever we launch any rockets or spacecrafts in the northern hemisphere, we usually do it on the eastern coast when it is in the northern hemisphere, right? Why is it so? It's because of the Coriolis force, right? So the rocket launch in northern hemisphere will always happen on the east coast because of the Coriolis force. Let's move on. So Artemis is an uncrewed flight test. Artemis 1, if I have to say specifically, Artemis 1. Under Artemis, we have three. That is the first one, second one, and the third one. So Artemis 1 is an uncrewed flight test. That is, there are no human beings. There's only a robot in this Artemis 1. Okay. It provides a foundation for deep space exploration and to demonstrate the commitment and capability to extend the human existence to moon and beyond. So what do they mean by this? They say that we are trying to take human beings to the moon and beyond. When they say beyond, based on the steps which we learn through this Artemis 1, we will be utilizing that knowledge to further take astronauts to moon. We will be utilizing this knowledge to take astronauts further to Mars. That is the intention. Okay. So first, the Artemis 1, 2 will happen, through which we are aiming to take the humans to the moon, and then further it is also about taking human beings to Mars. And during this flight, the spacecraft will be launched. That is, what is the spacecraft here? The spacecraft here is Orion. Orion will be launched on the most powerful rocket in the world. That is SLS, right? Space Launch System. That is the most powerful rocket in the world as of now. And the spacecraft Orion will be launched through the Space Launch System, and it will fly farther than any other spacecraft built for humans has ever flown so far. This is the speciality of the Artemis program, and it will travel 280,000 miles from Earth, and it is for a course of over about 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, and then the Orion will stay in space longer than any other ship for astronauts has done without docking to a space station, and it will also return home faster than ever before. Later, I will also be showing the trajectory path of the rocket. I hope you have understood so far, right? So during this flight, the spacecraft, which is the Orion, will be launched to the most powerful rocket in the world, that is the Space Launch Station. It will travel around 280,000 miles from Earth, and it takes a course of about 4 to 6 weeks. And the spacecraft will stay in space longer than any other spacecraft has stayed so far in space in history. And with the Artemis mission, the NASA will first will land the first woman. It will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. So NASA aims to land a woman and a person of color as part of its Artemis program. When we say person of color, it means they are referring to darker skinned person, right? So this is what they mean. So with Artemis mission, NASA aims to land a woman and a person of color on the moon using innovative technologies, and also it will collaborate with commercial and international partners to establish long-term human robotic presence on and around the moon. Then it further will utilize the lessons learned in these Artemis mission 1 and 2 to take the next giant step, that is sending the first astronauts to Mars. Okay, which has never been accomplished so far by any country in our world. So based on the lessons learned from the Artemis program, the NASA ultimately aims to send astronauts to Mars in the near future. So this is a picture wherein I can show you what the SLS looks like. So this is the NASA's new moon rocket will deliver the Orion capsule which will carry astronauts in future missions. So here you can see this is this one and this one. These two are the rocket boosters which provide 75% of the rocket's thrust during the launch. Okay, and this part here, this is the engine. And then further here you can see this is the upper stage liquid fuel here, this part. And then this is the Orion capsule. So this is here in this region we have the spacecraft Orion, right? Got it? So this is where we have the spacecraft. This is where we have the upper stage liquid fuel. This is the engine. And this are the rocket boosters. One we have here and one we have here. And these are the ones which provide around 75% of the thrust that is required for the rocket to take off in order to escape the gravity of the earth, right? And that is why this is very powerful. It is one of the most powerful, not one of the, it is the powerful rocket in the world as of now. Now we should discuss in detail about what is the space launch system, okay, what is the Orion, and so on. Space launch system. The space launch system, which I showed you the picture earlier, that is the most powerful rocket which we have presently, and it is used for NASA's deep space explorations as part of the program. Okay, and then the space launch system took off on its first flight on 16th November 2022, and it produced a maximum of 8.8 million pounds of thrust. Here you can see, right? So it produced a maximum of 8.8 million pounds of thrust, exerting more power than any rocket ever so far. Okay, that is what makes this space launch system such a powerful rocket in the world. Okay, it produces a maximum of 8.8 million pounds of thrust. And here also the rocket propulsion is delivered in stages just like any other rockets. Now coming to the spacecraft, which is the Orion, right? So NASA's Orion spacecraft is built to take humans farther than they have ever gone so far in history. That is, it will serve as the exploration vehicle which carries the crew to the space. So it is in this spacecraft that the robots and the astronauts can travel, right? Travel to space. That is, they can go up to the lunar orbit. So Orion serves as the exploration vehicle and it will carry this crew to the space. It provides emergency abort capability and it sustains the crew during the space travel, and it also provides safe re-entry from deep space return velocities. So after going to the lunar orbit and doing all the research and studies over there, also the return will also be through the spacecraft Orion. That's what they mean, right? So Orion launch happened on November 16, through the rocket, which is the Space Launch System rocket. So the rocket is a space launch system which carries the spacecraft Orion and launches it in the lunar orbit. Okay, I hope this is very simple and you're following. Now comes the gateway. So the gateway is a vital component of NASA's Artemis program, and it serves as a multi-purpose outpost, and it keeps orbiting or revolving around the moon, and it provides support for long-term human return to the lunar surface and serves as a staging point for deep space exploration. So I already showed you how the gateway is. Say, this is the moon. Say, this is the moon. And this is the lunar orbit of the moon, right? We have the gateway over here. This is the gateway, and this is a very vital component of NASA's Artemis program. So what happens is the Orion, that is the spacecraft, will go and it will get docked here in the gateway. I don't think the correct term is dock. However, the spacecraft will be here in this gateway, and this gateway keeps revolving in the lunar orbit around the moon. Okay, and this can be used to provide long-term human return to the lunar surface. So from this gateway, the astronauts can go to the lunar surface and they can come back to the gateway, and from here again they can come back to the Earth. So this is the purpose of the gateway. Got it? So NASA is also working with commercial and international partners to establish the gateway. Now it has already been established. Okay, fine. So what is the need for NASA to do deep space exploration, especially in the moon? So the question can be, why do they want to go to the moon? That is to demonstrate new technologies, capabilities, and business approaches needed for future exploration, including Mars. As I already told you, these are the lessons or the stepping stones which we are taking in our mission to Mars, right? So it is why they're going to the moon is to demonstrate new technologies and to understand the exploration opportunities so that they can take the astronauts to Mars later. So here they want to study the moon to learn more about the origin and the history of the Earth, moon and our solar system. Though we have various theories like the Big Bang theory and so on, which speaks about how the various planets and the sun and the moon came into existence, still there's a lot of research that needs to be done. So this will also help us to learn more about the origin and the history of the Earth, the sun, the moon and the planets. It also establishes American leadership and strategic presence on the moon. As usual, it is a national interest of USA, right? So also to expand USA's global economic impact. Further, also to broaden the commercial and international partnerships, to inspire a new generation and encourage careers in STEM. So they want to inspire a new generation, and that is called as a what do you call it as? It is called as the Artemis generation. They want to inspire a new generation called as the Artemis generation. And they also want to encourage careers in STEM. What do we mean by STEM? STEM means science, technology, engineering and mathematics. That is what it means, right? So also while maintaining American leadership and to build global alliance, and they also say it is to explore deep space so that the whole of mankind can be benefited from that. So how do they do this? First and foremost, I told you they have the most powerful rocket, which is the Space Launch System. Okay, so the Space Launch System was launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, which is on the East Coast. And through this, they will send the astronauts on the spacecraft. The spacecraft here is Orion. Okay, the Orion spacecraft will carry the astronauts, and it will carry them to the lunar orbit far away from Earth. Then the astronauts will dock the Orion at the gateway. Yes, so docking is the correct term. So what will happen is the Orion will get docked in the gateway, and from there they will be transferred to a human landing system to the surface of the moon to carry on further lunar expeditions. And then they will return to the orbital outpost to board Orion again before returning safely to the Earth. Let me explain this to you in detail. So, if this is the moon, this is the lunar orbit, they will have the gateway over here in the lunar orbit. Okay, so the orbit, this is the lunar orbit, this is the gateway, and the spacecraft, which is the Orion. The spacecraft, which is the Orion, will be docked in this gateway. So the astronauts can reach the lunar orbit through the Orion, and they can reach the gateway. From here, they can move to the moon to carry on the lunar expeditions, and again from the moon, they can return back to the gateway, and they can come aboard onto the spacecraft Orion, and they can return back to Earth. This is how this works. Got it? I have explained it to you like a very simple layman terms so that you can understand it properly. So when did this program begin? So as I told you, the first Artemis 1 was launched on November 16th in 2022. Okay, so it has begun in 2022, and throughout the decade, a suite of science experiments and technology demonstrations to the lunar surface will be carried out, and commercial lunar payloads will also be delivered to the lunar orbit. And then the Artemis 1 is an uncrewed flight. I told you we do not have any astronauts or human beings on this spacecraft. We have only the robo. Okay. And this is about Artemis 1. Okay. So this is to test the Space Launch Station and the Orion spacecraft together. That is how effectively this can be done. And then from Artemis 2 mission onwards, we will flight test it with the crew. That is, from Artemis 2 onwards, we will be sending astronauts as part of this program. So Artemis 1 is the first flight of the new space launch system, and this is a heavy lift vehicle as NASA refers to it. And it is the most powerful rocket engine, and it is even more powerful than the Apollo's Saturn V system, which took the astronauts to the moon in the 1960s and 70s. As I already told you, in 1960s and 70s, we used Apollo's Saturn V system to take the astronauts to the moon. Whereas this satellite launch system is much more powerful than that, and it will land the astronauts in the south pole of the moon, which has never been accomplished so far in history. So this is the Artemis 1 program, wherein it is an uncrewed. I told you we do not have any astronauts on this. Here we are only testing the space launch system and the Orion spacecraft. That is how well the space launch system can carry the Orion spacecraft, and how the Orion spacecraft will get docked into the gateway, and how it will do the exploration. That is what we are trying to test in Artemis 1. In Artemis 2, it will be a crewed flight. That is, we will have astronauts on board in the spacecraft. And then here again, we will be learning more lessons about deep space exploration. And then coming to Artemis 3 and beyond, here lot of planning is underway, and we do not have exact idea about what it is all about. Okay, we shall wait and learn about it further. So this is the trajectory of the rocket. So first it is launched here. Can you see here? They have numbered it as 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is where the rocket is launched. It moves all the way like this. Just give me a minute. So it is launched here. Okay, it moves this way around and it moves this way all the way like this, and it revolves around the moon in 2 circles, and then it returns back to the earth and comes back here. Okay, so I hope you got a fair understanding of this Artemis program and you'll be able to answer any questions from this topic without any difficulty. For more such interesting lectures, you can follow us on the social media and also subscribe to our channel. Until I meet you in the next lecture with another interesting topic, take care, have a good day. Thank you.